Hopefully you got a chance to meet with some folks and make some connections there in the breakout rooms. Lots of good conversation and folks there. But today, as we jump into it now, we're going to have a little interview here with James Hamrick, VP of Clinical Oncology at Flatiron Health, also a physician as well. So I think we get the double benefit of both the medical and the business side. So welcome, James.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. This is my first time here, and what a wonderful forum. I've already met a bunch of great and interesting entrepreneurs.
Fantastic. So what we'll do here, probably for the next 30 minutes or so, we'll jump into a little bit of James's sort of background and why he got into medicine and the business side. Then we'll probably spend some time around Flatiron, just talking through his journey there and pre and post acquisition and some of the lessons learned at different stages and where they're going. And then we'll wrap up with some of his thoughts on the future of healthcare in Atlanta and what we can do. So as we're going forward, any questions, just feel free to put them in the chat. We'll probably wait till the end to ask them, but JC can kind of collect them. And then as we get to the end, we'll ask those. So with that, James, we'll kind of jump in, maybe just to start with, like, why did you decide to even get into healthcare, as a physician, as a doctor?
Yeah, great. So, so I originally am from North Carolina and, was actually a swimmer in college. That took up a lot of my time and energy. But when probably my junior year, when I started thinking about what in the world am I going to do with my life, I really enjoyed the combination of science, but also history. Those were the things that I was studying at UNC Chapel Hill. I'm a Tar Heel through and through. And I knew that I wanted, like many people that go into medicine, I wanted to do something that I felt like was helping people, but that also allowed me to engage the scientific side of my brain. And so went into medical school, and you do your 4 years of medical school. I did that at UNC Chapel Hill, and then you do residency and then fellowship. And so at the end of med school, you've got your MD, but you really don't know how to take care of patients. So I did residency, which is 3 years, really grinding, learning a ton. This was out at UC San Francisco. I did internal medicine, which is where you learn to be sort of a general practitioner for adults, and thought I would actually do primary care, and still realize that primary care docs are really a really good primary care doc is really the best kind of doctor there is, because they really can help you. But it's a challenge because patients come in. And so for those of you that are familiar with the healthcare space, often the primary care doc is, because of the way the health system works, is just triaging problems. So, someone comes in and I've got back pain or shortness of breath, and you do your best to manage it. But healthcare and medicine has become so hyper specialized now that I found myself sort of more triaging and paperwork. And I'm old, so things sadly are still on paper in healthcare, but I remember when they were really on paper in healthcare. And so there was a lot of that. So I said, I like this like deep relationship with patients and families that you can get in primary care, but I need more focus. And so nearing the end of my 3-year residency, this was back in 2003, I decided what I really loved was cancer and blood disorders and, the fascinating science of that. Also, I really loved that the latest breakthroughs in cancer, even back in the early aughts, they would be on the front page, or at least the business section of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, because, our society places a high amount of emphasis on healthcare, but specifically on cancer care. It's something that, I'm sure everyone here has been touched by, either personally or through a first degree relative by cancer in some way. So it gets a lot of attention. And I in reflection, I think back and I think, that's probably part of why I chose oncology or cancer care, is because you could read about it in the business section of the newspaper, and you could also, and the science behind it was advancing quickly. So did 3 years of oncology fellowship out at UC San Francisco, where I'd done my residency. And came out as a general medical oncologist. And this was back in 2006. And that's when I returned to the Atlanta area. So was from North Carolina, was married, and had my second of 3 kids while we were out in San Francisco. And then we wanted to be closer to a family who are in Asheville and Chapel Hill, et cetera. So, but we wanted to be in a city. So Atlanta really checked all the boxes, and man, have just loved it since I moved here in 2006. I've raised my 3 kids here. Went into practice with a large group here in Atlanta called Georgia Cancer Specialists. You've probably seen them. They're about 40, 45 great docs all over the Atlanta area. Was there for about 2.5 or 3 years, but I was commuting out from in town where I live to Lawrenceville. Loved the practice, but that got a little old. I knew Kaiser Permanente from California. So they're a huge integrated healthcare system out really big on the West Coast. Also here in Atlanta have about 350,000 patients under their care. So in early 2009, moved to KP, and again was practicing as a general oncologist. Wound up being division chief of the little division there around 2011. And so I love the patient care, but when I became division chief, I had a day a week blocked from seeing patients to do my administrative work. And basically my task there was to do sort of strategy and operations and quality for the cancer care team. And so that's where my brain started to see how frustrating it was. We were on a large enterprise electronic medical record. So that's where physicians do all their documentation. You all probably know this, but I'll sort of say it, when you go see the doctor is often typing away at the computer, and that can feel distracting, et cetera. And so, I was frustrated with that experience. And as division chief with trying to do quality improvement cycles, et cetera, there's all this data being generated. Why is it so hard for me as the leader of this tiny little division to do things like quality improvement cycles, use data to make better decisions? So I've been talking a lot, so I'm going to stop there, but that's where that's where sort of the seed was planted of, hey, I love patient care, but I'm also really intrigued by the idea of how do we improve the experience in the exam room for patients, and how do we make better database decisions to drive quality of care improvements.
Yeah, well, thanks for that background, James, and lots of good things we can dive into on specialty care and the patient experience,
yep.
And all that. But maybe let me just start with that, from just your views of the patient experience, as a whole, of evolving from, I think you mentioned early in the conversation, right, that like, hey, primary care is sort of a triage, but then it becomes very specialized, to your
yep.
point of these complicated medical records that may or may not talk to each other between doctors.
Yep.
And then from the business side, like just being able to use that as a way to help. What have you sort of learned, through some of those experiences about patient care and how that's evolved?
Yeah. So, I think the patient care experience, I'm an optimist, and I think that we have a lot of potential to improve that. You can get great care in the United States now. But it unfortunately does depend on your insurance status and sort of your medical sophistication and your ability to navigate the system. I do a lot of, and I'm happy and honored to do it. Hey, my friend's mom just got diagnosed with breast cancer. What do we need to do next? And it's hard if you don't have, if you don't have a navigator or someone who can help say, you should go get seen here, make sure they ask that, et cetera. So that said, I am optimistic about the appetite and some of these signals of the business model to make the experience more patient friendly. So you touched on, I think patients come to the healthcare system, seeking, laying a lot of trust in it, which you kind of have to do. And seeking the expertise that they need. And often from the patient perspective, it can be a black box. Why is the doctor typing into that computer? What is that actually doing? Where can I access my own medical record? And then it's one thing to say, okay, I can get a data dump of all my medical records, but how about some patient-friendly language or some way to help me interpret it and understand it? Because, there's a lot of data to show that an informed patient who understands their situation will have a better patient journey, so better outcomes, and also a more satisfying sort of care experience, which is really important. But there's also a risk if we don't build infrastructure and systems to make that to do that in an equitable way, that we worsen inequities in care, which is really a risk. So for example, you brought up interoperability, this idea that because of the regulatory environment and some of when you build an electronic medical record, you really have to spend a lot on security to make sure that you don't let anyone's PHI or protected health information, there's no data breach. And there have been some really big, nasty examples of that recently. I'm thinking of Change Healthcare, if you follow that story. And so you spend a lot of time locking data down. And nowadays, data is perceived to have a lot of value. De-identified aggregated data is perceived to have a lot of value. So there's a lot, there aren't that many incentives to share. There's a lot of effort and expense that goes into protecting PHI so you don't have a data breach. But what do you need as a patient? You need access to your data, right? So I need to understand what do my labs show? What's my diagnosis? What are my comorbidities? What's the treatment plan? Everyone here's probably seen, a patient portal, which I would still consider a fairly early version of patient-friendly interoperability, but we can get lab results. I get test results at the same time my doctor does. And that is promising. There is also a fair amount of regulation in this space. So I don't need to tell this group, healthcare is a highly regulated space. At Flatiron, we spend a lot of time, because we operate an electronic medical record, thinking about regulations related to interoperability. So 21st Century Cures Act has a lot of emphasis on interoperability, letting systems share data. And while regulations can read wacky all the time, and you think like, who wrote this? And clearly they didn't know anything about it. Actually, the intent, I think, is very good, which is, hey, let's just make sure that doctors and patients have the information they need in a timely way, in a format that's actionable and usable, so that they can make the best decisions for themselves and have the best outcomes and the best care experience, first and second. And then obviously, let's all try to do this in a way that doesn't break the bank. So I do think, to flag one area that I am optimistic on is thinking about innovating in the space of patient-facing decision support is something that I'm bullish on. Now, the business model, who's going to pay for that, is nuanced and complex, but we're sort of at the point where the regulations have said, hey, you got to share this data. What's happening a lot are big data dumps, CCDA files, et cetera, that are not very user-friendly to read. I think that's going to get better, and I think that's a space that's ripe for innovation.
Great. Lots of good stuff in there, James. Let me go back to sort of what you were saying about just that transition in your mind of, hey, practicing to then 1 day a week out of the office, seeing the data, seeing some of the challenges, but also sort of seems like exciting you about the business side of healthcare. Talk us through sort of, how that sort of led you to say, hey, actually, want to move over to Flatiron and take on sort of a business side as well.
Yeah, so that's a fun thing to talk about. So 2014 or so, James decides, hey, I'm interested in doing something. I'd like to. I was 40. Let's see, I would have been 43 at the time. I was thinking about, how can I set my life up so that I still see patients, but I do some sort of something else in the sort of healthcare strategy space? And I started doing things on nights and weekends that, so taking, as a doctor, I would get invitations to sit on panels, to go to workshops, to participate in some of the internal cancer leadership infrastructure that we had nationally at Kaiser. So I did all those things, and that was very much nights and weekends. And I was sort of looking around for what's out there. None of that went anywhere. The thing that got me to Flatiron was I had a friend here in Atlanta who said, hey, you got to meet, one of my buddies just started a cancer company. You got to meet him. My point there is, while none of the things that I did led anywhere, I think just having my antenna out and recognizing the possibility is what made me open to my friend's introduction to one of the founders of Flatiron. So basically, a friend here in Atlanta kind of kept hounding me and saying, Flatiron had been founded fair and was still pretty small. Said, you got to meet my friend. He just started this oncology company. I was like, yeah. A lot of people, there are a lot of oncology companies out there. I think my friend was hounding me and also hounding the Flatiron co-founder. So finally, probably in 2015 at ASCO, which is the American Society of Clinical Oncology, that's the big national meeting, the biggest cancer meeting in the world. I think just to shut our mutual friend up, we said, okay, we'll grab coffee. So we go get coffee, and as with many founders, this guy Nat Turner was a very he was just so passionate and so smart. I was like, did you go to medical school? Because you understood, which he had not, So coming out of that conversation, I said, man, and Flatiron at that point, and still was all about how can we take the data and make it useful? We're collecting all this data as a byproduct of healthcare. How can we make it useful? And so at the time, my first thought was, hey, I need to put together a partnership between Flatiron and Kaiser Permanente, where I'm working, because they're doing exactly what I need, which is like, we've got this trove of data, but it's just not actionable. I can't get it in real time, et cetera. So, we spent 6 or 8 months going back and forth on that. And, I realized in retrospect, like we were just iterating and thinking about ways we could partner together. And while that didn't go anywhere, a couple of things I think we learned on both sides. And at some point, Nat said, hey, we think a lot alike. You should come join us. And I said, hey, man, I'm a simple country doctor from Georgia. Y'all are up in New York City. I can't do that. What are you talking about? But it turned out I was ready to make that leap of faith. And so in the summer of 2016, I joined Flatiron. I was the 3rd doctor at Flatiron. And so the first was Amy Abernathy, who is really a luminary in the health tech space, went on to become number 2 at FDA, and then led Verily for a while, and now is doing something new, which will be worth watching. And so basically, I knew when I went through that initial decision process, I didn't want to give up clinical care entirely. Kaiser here in Georgia was great. They allowed me to continue to see patients every Monday here as a contract doctor. That was super important because that was how I paid my mortgage and put food on the table, right? And if the Flatiron thing all went to crap, then I wouldn't have given up my clinical skills. So pre-pandemic, from 2016 on, I would see patients every Monday in Atlanta. I'd get on a plane Tuesday morning, go to New York City, spend Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday in New York, fly home Thursday evening, work from home for Flatiron on Fridays. And I sort of settled into that lifestyle. I look back now and I say, man, how'd I do that? That was a lot of air travel. And of course, the pandemic changed all of that. But it was really wonderful. And I was a babe in the woods when it came to being at a technology company. And so it's been a fascinating journey.
Yeah, well, good stuff, Jay. It's couple follow-ups in there, but first, just for context for the audience, maybe, if they're not familiar with Flatiron, sort of, what's the 30-second pitch of what Flatiron does?
Yeah, so Flatiron is a company. It's sort of a 2-sided business. So the side of the business that I spend most of my time on is we have an oncology-specific electronic medical record, and so about 40% of the independent community oncologists in the United States, this is the computer software they're tapping away on when they're taking care of patients. And so we spend a lot of time trying to make that the best possible user experience for an oncologist. And I think we've differentiated ourselves as the leading independent oncology-specific EMR. So we think about that's product development, product iteration. As part of our business associates agreement with these practices, we return identified patient data back to the practices for what I was talking about earlier, quality and operations. So if you're the lead physician in a cancer group, you have the data you need to make sure that you're billing appropriately, that you're driving quality, that you can measure quality improvements. So we return data identify data to practice that way. We also de-identify the data and aggregate it and create large aggregated data sets. So we have, that gives us something that it has a lot of value, which is a snapshot in real time of how cancer care is happening in the United States. So we can take from all these different practices, we can aggregate all the breast cancer patients, all the lung cancer patients. We have a partially human, partially automated, as you might imagine now, very machine learning AI involved process whereby we aggregate and de-identify that in a HIPAA compliant way. Those big data sets then can be used for, they can be commercialized largely to pharma. That's the main business model. But we share them with academic researchers. We share them with regulators like FDA and European medicines. And so it's a pretty unique data set. And really, one of the things I'm proudest of at Flatiron is we really pioneered the concept of real world evidence, which is the idea of, hey, let's take all this data that's captured at the point of care, let's de-identify it in a HIPAA compliant way, and then let's use it to be smarter about the way we treat cancer.
Well, awesome. Two paths I want to go based on that, James. A couple of things you said just about your own journey, and then some more ones specific to Flatiron. But I think two things you said, which I thought were interesting, just about your own journey. You mentioned as you were talking with Nat and learning, you mentioned that, hey, we thought a lot alike. Sort of what I heard you say. For folks who are thinking of joining startups or building their team, talk to the importance about some of that common style thinking versus a specific idea that you want to jump on.
I think that we, especially Nat, but we both had sort of very sit back and listen first and understand the pain, and this is like product 101 to you all, but for me, it was some of it came naturally and much of it I had to learn. Sit back and understand the pain points. One of the things that really impressed me with the way he thought was he did not assume to know or understand what the problems were that needed to be solved for doctors. And so I think an attitude of really spending, we were willing, when I was thinking of going there, I said, look, we've got to have a big clinical team. We need to have experts that have been on the front lines that understand exactly what are the pain points that doctors and patients face and care teams face in the room. And of course, much of that was related to the electronic medical record. So I think that sort of natural curiosity and humility and willingness to say, I don't understand my user's experience. I'm not going to assume that I can tell them how to do it better, but I'm going to really watch. I'm going to invest in a clinical team for their wisdom, and we're going to spend a ton of time at the elbow of the people using the software. So that was a commonality of thinking was, I guess it's like pave the cow paths, don't lay down new roads, right? Pave the cow. And so like so I really appreciated, and I think we thought a lot in that sphere. Also looking really closely at the incentives and the way healthcare gets paid for in the United States is controversial, love it or hate it, et cetera. But understanding, like trying to drill down quickly on where is the value. So when conceiving of this idea of real world data, who's going to be the customer? How can you physicians traditionally have had a somewhat skeptical or confrontational relationship with pharma companies and with payers. How can you navigate that? So, how can we say like, look, there's benefit for everyone if we can create a new source of powerful data, meaning, let's get beyond the ways we've practiced for so long, randomized prospective clinical trials. Obviously, that's the gold standard, but those are super expensive. They take forever to do. There are a million reasons why you can't do that for every situation. We both realized there's a lot of useful data that's happening every day, and we're missing an opportunity. So thinking about that, and then who's gonna fund that in a way that you can learn for everyone, and then how can you turn around and help physicians understand that, hey, let's not let all this work you're doing go to waste. Yes, we know you're entering data in the computer so you can get paid, and that's obviously super important. We know you're entering it so you can take care of your patient, and that's super important. But there's a lot of there's a lot of good stuff in there. Let's not let it go to waste. And so, and let's turn that data around, make it useful to you. So we thought a lot. I think those sort of are like first principle type things, listen to your user, understand your customer. And that was where we found a lot of our conversations came back to those.
Yeah. So one of the things I love there, James, you just quickly described one of the reasons why healthcare is so complex, right? Is you talked about regulations earlier, and then here, just all the different constituents, payers, pharma, physicians, patients, talk to us through having been in part of making all those things connect and play together and thinking through those, who's paying, who's using, what are some lessons learned you've had of how to manage that complex web of regulations and constituents in healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, again, you sort of try to get back to first principles of you can sit in any one of those stakeholder camps, but we've all, as we said earlier, we've all been touched by cancer in some way. And I firmly believe that we all do want better outcomes and a better care experience for cancer patients. And we all understand how expensive and what a risk the rising cost of healthcare is for everyone. So if you're a patient, if you're a pharma company, if you're a payer, if you're a doctor or a nurse, a pharmacist, those are truths that I think everyone understands and gets into the cancer game to try to help. So then I think you have to think through, what are the alliances here? So something we're working on, and this is another space, it's a really tough nut to crack, prior authorization, right? So prior authorization, I mean, that is everybody, it's kind of the bane of everyone's existence. If you're a doctor, you say, I know Mrs. Jones needs this chemo and we got to make it happen. And now I got to spend all this time. I got to hire 3 humans to fill out the authorization, the portal. And even on the payer side, there's a lot of expense there. I think there are elements, and then as a patient, you're sitting there saying, well, I'd like to get my chemo scheduled, but the auth hasn't come through yet. So that is an area where you can get a lot of shared goals around improving that process. So how can we collect the data better upfront, make streamline the transfer of data to the payer? So you're trying to find commonalities among the stakeholder groups. Things are shifting. So if you aren't following it, the model of independent physicians is, they're getting hired, doctors are getting hired by health systems. Their small groups are getting confederating, and getting backed by private equity. I think the statistic I heard that's really sort of stunning is that I think Optum now employs something like 10% of the physicians in the United States. So that shifts the balance of the stakeholders. And now the payers and the doctors, and Kaiser Permanente is an example of this, the payers and the doctors are in their own alliances. And so that shifts the balance of how you have to think about the constituents. I think always getting back to who is the customer here and who is the user, and really understanding what their incentives are is one of the big challenges. It's also what makes it really fun. The last thing I'll say before I shut up on this topic is just so much of healthcare was regulated into existence. The thing I'm pointing at most is the HITECH Act that got everyone off of paper and onto electronic medical records. And there was no human-centered design that went into it, right? So EHR 1.0, which is what I've seen in my career, was basically regulated into existence. The user experience was a total afterthought. And that's a large part of why you hear physicians and everyone complain so much about the EHR experience. I'm an optimist. I think we're poised at EHR 2.0. I think the ambient voice stuff is going to be transformative. So the idea that instead of spending a lot of time typing and writing a note, I can have some ambient voice technology listen to me in the room and do a pretty darn good first pass. So those are all change moments that I think are opportunities for entrepreneurs.
Yeah. Well, I know we're probably got about 10 minutes or so left. So I've just 1 or 2 more questions. And then folks, if you have questions for James, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll ask at the end here. So one of the things I think, James, is interesting to look at is you mentioned, hey, I was doctor number 3 to join Flatiron, and talking to Nat and team back, 10 years ago to now, company that's raised hundreds of millions of dollars, been acquired, So you've probably seen a lot change in Flatiron over the last 10 years. What are some lessons learned of how the priorities at a company change as it evolves and grows, and some success, some good decisions or some mistakes you made years before and after acquisition?
Yeah, it's a great, so we got acquired by Roche in 2018, and it's been fascinating, and it's been a great ride. But to your point, the first thing that happened was we got acquired by Roche, and it was a big number, and your customers hear about that. So our customers on the EHR side were a bunch of community oncologists, and they, I think, they thought that like we all got all this money in our pockets. Now, some people made a ton of money, no doubt, but they saw a big number, didn't understand that, like, okay, there were a lot of investors. It's not just now that we're totally flush and can do this, that, and the other. Some of that was true. It was a nice injection of cash for the company to build more and to basically extend our roadmap. We had spent a lot of time trying to sort of on short-term goals, as I'm sure you're familiar with, because we were basically doing a capital round, and then the acquisition happened, and it gave us more roadmap to really think about, like, hey, if we really want to build clinical decision support right in the electronic medical record, now we can take a bit of a deep breath because it gives us more runway, right? But we had to deal with customers coming to us, and there was a lot of anger. There was some, hey, you took our data and you made all this money. And so there was a lot of relationship management that came after that, explaining to people that, yes, some people made individual money, but it's not like we're all floating around on yachts now, et cetera, And so that customer perception of what happens and kind of the lack of understanding by healthcare people about how finance works was really interesting. We were worried that our new corporate owner might be heavy-handed and might come in and really, rewrite the roadmap and change priorities. They've actually been wonderful. So it gave I think they recognize, Roche is a 100-plus-year-old company. They recognize that health tech is not their space. That's why they're interested in Flatiron, to diversify their holdings and to really validate this real world evidence, which might lead to quicker approvals with FDA. So they have been great, but I think the discipline, when you're a startup and you're using investor money, we were operating in a very sort of startup way. We were running at a lot of things. Suddenly, you have to learn to focus, and you have to say, like, these are the things that we're good at. There are especially when you have first mover status in something or real world evidence. There are a million things you could do. It took time. We ran at a lot of things that we probably, if we had stopped and thought a little bit more, they were not ultimately sustainable. So learning the discipline as a company to really focus was sort of a huge part of the post-acquisition transition. And that is an ongoing process. I think the best leaders and team members at a startup are not necessarily the best leaders and team members at a company that's maturing and trying to get to profitability. And that's not a knock on anyone. I mean, myself, I've had to change dramatically in terms of the way I thought about things. So requires more discipline. It's kind of like, hey, we made it over the big hill. Oh crap! Now we got to figure out how to run a mature, growing company. And so it's a really fun journey.
I love that, how the journey of the leader changes throughout, whether you're, at an idea stage to your first customers, to scaling, to post-acquisition, to ongoing. I think that's a good mindset of that continuous learning required to keep evolving. And then I love your takeaway there of the discipline to focus. I think at any stage, that's a great one, that too often it's easy to be distracted by lots of things, and often the most successful ones just put their head down, laser focus, and execute.
Yep.
One question you're coming in from the audience here, and if there's others, feel free to go forward. You talked a lot about, the data that goes into managing, cancer care. How do you factor in data outside the doctor's office? that plays into other decisions they're making or other programs they're doing or social determinants of health? How does that play into?
Yeah. So, so those things, we are smarter as a cancer care infrastructure about the impact of things that are happening outside of the doctor's office, and realizing that, the old model of, hey, I'm going to see this patient every 3 to 4 weeks while they're on chemo in the bricks and mortar office doesn't work anymore. So, we actually at Flatiron we are not going to build all of that functionality. So we actually look to partner with vendors that are building things like patient relationship management software. So, or social determinants of health, functionality. We build functionality within our EMR that meets the regulatory requirements of like the data you need to capture for social determinants of health. But again, going back to my part about focusing that I just brought up, we want to run the platform, but we want to partner with vendors that have built functionality to solve for those problems. So if you're in the weeds on this, that things like complex care management, chronic disease management, there now are some billing codes for that. We do some of that. We partner with other vendors on other parts of it. A lot of building to the FHIR standard, so building an API integration so that the practices that use our EMR can work with whichever vendor they want, is an exciting part of sort of a platform-based care platform now. And the way those get to us, we get a lot of requests from lots of vendors to integrate. And what we can't do is build a bespoke integration for everyone that we would like to. But when we get a critical mass of customers that come to us and say, hey, we see this great patient relationship management functionality, we'd really like it to integrate directly into the EHR. If our customers come to us, that's what gets it prioritized on our roadmap. So we're going to build a FHIR-enabled API integration, for patient relationship management, for things like ordering molecular profiling. A big part of cancer care now is sending off for the genomic profiling of the tumor or the patient's genomics. That's not what we do. We integrate with all the big labs so that the doctors can order and result that right in the EHR without having to go to another portal. And that's the kind of thing about understanding, paying attention to clinician workflow. Like I need data. I need molecular data. I need social determinants of health data. I need mortality data. I need all this stuff. And I don't want to have to leave the EMR because I'm seeing 30 patients today. I'm too busy. I don't want to have to log into another portal, blah, blah, blah. So you got to really understand, the more you can put into the physician's workflow, the better it's going to be.
Awesome. Well, James, thank you so much. I know there's some other questions around value-based care and what's wrong with healthcare, probably longer topics that we'll have to save, for another day here. But really appreciate your perspectives, around focus, and the balance of sort of understanding patient care and the constituents. Lots of good learnings here. So appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today.
Yeah, I'm going to drop my my LinkedIn into I see some questions here, and I'm not going to be able to get to all of them, but I am going to drop you can find me on LinkedIn, James Hamrick, and I'm going to drop my my LinkedIn into the chat here. So feel free to reach out. And I would just, this is such a cool forum. I kind of skipped because I live in Atlanta, but I worked in New York, but my company's in New York. I haven't connected with the Atlanta group, and this is such a wonderful forum. So thank you all for being here, and thanks for giving me the time.
Yeah, well, thanks, James. Appreciate it. Just as we wrap up, again, we'll post a recap online here in a few days. You can check out some of our healthcare resources to watch past meetups or see other startups do interesting things in the city. And then as we move forward into the fall, we're actually going to try and experiment going back to some of our in-person sessions as well as virtual sessions. I know there's a preference. Some people prefer the virtual, some prefer the in-person. So look out for some more stuff about an in-person healthcare meetup coming up this fall.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, with that, have a great day. Thanks, everybody, for joining.
Thanks.
Thank you. Take care, guys.
Thanks, y'all. Have a great day.
Thanks. It was great.